Good afternoon. My name is John, and this is the Homestead Diary. I'm going to start going today in earnest through the notes that I made at the Iron Survival Training held this past weekend in Pomona, Missouri. And anybody who's interested in tactical training, good people, solid training, and definitely solid in regards to the amount that they charge. I won't tell you how much they charge because I don't want to sway your opinion of them one way or the other. But suffice it to say that it's something that I could afford and something that I felt was well worth spending the money for. Anyway, I'm going to just start out with some basic things, some notes that we went through. Part of the training was a whiteboard session that went on for a couple hours in the morning. And just kind of reading through it, the first part that Mike, the head trainer, talked about is the point of this training is to gain an understanding of the fundamentals. He says there's no such thing as advanced tactics. There's only advanced application of the fundamentals. And that's something that he reiterated over and over and over again. It doesn't matter if there are all these different high-speed, tactical ideas that people want to throw in for this scenario, that scenario. It all comes back to what are the fundamentals and what should we be doing to maintain use of those fundamentals. And so we don't go outside of that and we don't try to get fancy because when it comes down to it, in a situation where you're required to rely on your unconscious memory, so to speak, of what it is that you're doing, you will revert to your fundamental training, and all these fancy things that people think that you should know or whatever, they don't necessarily apply in most situations. So you want to stick with the fundamentals. So we were involved in what is called the CQB, or Vehicular Close Quarters Combat Training. The idea being that we spend a lot of time in and around vehicles, and so there's a fairly good chance that if we were to be involved in a tactical situation, it could very likely be involving our vehicle or another vehicle, and so having a basic understanding of how you should behave and what parts of the vehicle offer protection and what parts of the vehicle do not offer protection is very important. He talked about that pulling the trigger is only about 2% of the equation. And so people spend a lot of time focusing on their aim and their accuracy. And yes, that's important. But when it comes down to it, whether or not you're pulling the trigger is only a very small portion of what's going on. He said a couple of times, the best gunfight is the one that you can avoid. Or you always win gunfights that you don't engage in. And so, very important to consider. If you can stay away from the gunfight or don't be where the gunfight is, then you win the gunfight. And that totally makes sense. If you don't want to go into the FEMA camps, don't be there. If you don't want to get involved in a riot, don't be there. Don't hang out in the inner cities where all these hoodlums are messing around, just looking to cause problems. So, change a little bit and talk about tactics. Now, there are mainly two different types of tactics that are taught, and what we typically think of with tactics is military tactics. And the military have a tendency, what they're trained to do is use overwhelming force. And there's a lot of playing around with the idea that, there's good engagement and bad engagement, but it also goes back to if you win the gunfight, then a lot of times really doesn't matter how you achieve that win as long as there isn't collateral damage, which I guess is one of the biggest concerns in a lot of today's modern warfare, is avoiding collateral damage. I guess that wasn't quite so much of a concern back during World War II when we used to firebomb entire cities and kill 90,000 people in one go. So there's military tactics, but there are also law enforcement tactics. And in law enforcement, there are certain lines that you don't cross. And you're always trying to minimize, number one, any sort of bystander damage, but also law enforcement always makes moves with the thought of, well, what happens if I get sued? Or, it's really about what's going to go on in our litigious society. Never mind that law enforcement, by and large, has qualified immunity, which means that in their line of duty, if they're doing something in the performance of their duty and it's not outside of that, then they don't really have to face the consequences as long as the boss doesn't think it's a problem or if there isn't enough public outcry. And so, two different things to consider in terms of tactics. And we're going to end there for today. We don't want to keep these. We want to keep these videos short, not go too long. And so, just some basic first thoughts about the training and the introduction, the first few minutes of that day where we went to Iron Survival for their vehicle close quarters combat training. Y'all have a blessed day.